Getting dressed from 1830 to 1845. Hello and welcome. I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're taking a look at Romantic era fashion, and we're going to get dressed from 1830 to 1845. What is the Romantic era? Well, Romantic era is basically the era between Regency fashion and mid-19th century fashion. So between that Regency silhouette that is very Greek inspired with the empire waistlines and very sleek, smooth silhouettes. And then between that and then the mid-19th century with very voluminous skirts and just big sleeves, big skirts, big, 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 big. The Romantic era ends up being kind of like the last hurrah for fastly paced fashion for a while. After that, in the mid-19th century, fashion really calms down and the changes from year to year start being a lot more subtle and a lot more gradual. Whereas in the Romantic era, especially during the 1830s, changes are really frequent and really dramatic. Outside of what fashion was doing, this is an era of great advancements in technology. This is really the heart of the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of the technologies that would later be expanded upon would be developed at first. And with the industrialization and the rise of the middle class, really comes a lot of innovation in this era. Not only for the industrial side of technology and like crafts, but also for home crafts. This is also the era when crochet first becomes the craft that we know and love today. And that brings me to today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online community for creatives with thousands of classes where you can learn new creative skills or improve on your existing skills. From thousands of classes to choose from, whatever creative endeavor it is that you want to learn, it is easy to find the class that is right for you. There's so many different classes to choose from, whether you're a complete beginner or a little bit more advanced. There's a ton of great projects for all skill levels. I'm currently working on a class on chainmail so that I can fix this amazing late Victorian or Edwardian mesh bag that I have. The class helped make it so much easier to figure out what in the world I'm supposed to be doing, and it definitely is still slow going. It definitely made it much easier to figure it out. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will get 20% off their first year of Skillshare. Get started today. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and now let's get to the actual clothing. For the entirety of the Romantic era, your base layer is your chemise. It is typically fairly long still in this period. It is typically made out of linen, but cotton is becoming more and more prevalent due to its cheapness. It's a simple loose garment made out of rectangles and either with narrow sleeves or slightly puffed sleeves. This layer is meant to be a barrier between you and the outer layers of your clothing. This layer protects you from your clothing and your clothing from you, your body oils, sweat, all of that stuff. It is also the most frequently laundered layer of your clothing, and this layer protects you from your corset especially. And next comes said corset. The corset is not only your bust support, but it is also the support layer for all the layers of clothing that you put on. It does gently shape your body, but in this era, there is no extreme tight lacing, really. Especially in the beginning of the era, in the 1830s outfit, I am wearing a very lightweight corset that is mostly just corded rather than boned. This sort of garment is extremely lightweight, and though it can shape your body gently, there is no way to actually tight lace this. It just won't do it. This kind of corset is typically still spiral laced. That means that the laces go up in a spiral or go down in a spiral, rather than the crisscross lacing that we are more commonly used to. By the late 30s, the spiral lacing has mostly disappeared in favor of that crisscross lacing, and that corset ties at the waistline rather than spiraling all the way down. This type of corset does allow for more modification of the shape of the body, but this era is not one of an extreme silhouette. The hourglass silhouette is still very gentle and very gradual curves. By the late 30s, the split busk is invented. It is not used in all corsets of this era, but it does make it a lot more easy to put on a corset. Late 30s and 40s corsets oftentimes have a hook in the front to reduce bulk from any of the lacing at the waistline. And as you can see with the split busk and the crisscross lacing, this corset is much faster to put on than the earlier 30s corset. As for the silhouette of the corset, in the beginning of this era, the bust is slightly higher than later on, and the hourglass silhouette is less prominent. Early 30s corsets still have shoulder straps that are left over from the Regency era, whereas by the 40s they have mostly disappeared. And a huge portion of the bust support comes from the center busk that is typically either wood or baleen. And your chemise underneath that corset not only protects your corset from your sweat and your body oils and you in general and getting dirty, it also protects your skin from your corset so that your skin doesn't get a heat rash as easily or those pressure marks that you could see, for instance, on Kardashian when she was tightly laced without anything underneath her corset. And next comes your stockings. These are typically linen, cotton, or silk for the summertime and wool for wintertime. And though lots of colorful options existed, white was by far the most popular in this era. And because they don't have any elastane in them, obviously, they are held up by garters. Most garters of this era do actually have some stretch to them. Oftentimes they were made out of knits, but also they could be made with elastics. Towards the end of this era, in the 1840s, elastics actually became widely popular and started being used in shoes especially. And women's magazines were full of knitting patterns for garters, and they were often, like the name implies, made with garter stitch. But though garters are a very utilitarian item, they could oftentimes be extremely pretty, and they could have embroidery on them and all kinds of fancy details like lace and things like that. People really liked to make their underthings pretty, even if nobody would see them. During the 1830s, drawers are still a fairly new item in a woman's wardrobe, though during this era they quickly do become standard. And yes, if you look at drawings, paintings, and later photographs, most of the time you'll see drawers worn on top of the chemise and the corset. And you'll see that the chemise is actually tucked in between the legs so that it covers the slit in the drawers. This is for two main reasons. First of all, when that chemise is tucked into those drawers, that is going to provide you a lot more protection so that if the slit does open when you sit down, you're not actually sitting with your bits hanging out on your top of your petticoats, which obviously isn't very hygienic. And then on top of that, if you were to fall or something happen, you don't accidentally flash everyone with your bits because your chemise is actually covering you, even though the drawers are split. And the other reason is because when your drawers are on top of your corset, you don't have to worry about the closures being uncomfortable underneath your corset or creating extra bulk. And next comes your pocket. Pockets were oftentimes worn either as a separate piece or as a separate pair. Clothes of this era could also have sewn-in pockets that are more, what we think of as pockets. But these kind of separate pockets could carry a lot more weight inside them without it being a problem with your clothing. Because if you have a sewn-in pocket on a dress, it can actually end up pulling on that garment and distorting the fabric so that you can clearly see that there's now a lot of weight in there. And on top of that, because the petticoats go all over that pocket, now there is no weird lines or bulges. The main structure layer for the skirts is your corded petticoat throughout the Romantic era. The width and the amount of cording in these garments does seem to vary quite a bit, with some of them being just corded on the bottom to give that stiffness to the hem, and some of them being corded all the way up to almost the waistline. Other than the cording, these garments are oftentimes quite heavily starched, which makes the fabric really stiff and very paper-like. So that itself already holds the shape out. Like here, I'm working on the skirts because they've been in the cupboard for a while to really fluff them back out. On top of the corded petticoat, you would wear at least one extra petticoat. This would hide the lines of the cording or the tucks or any other kind of weird bulges that bottom petticoat could create. Because we don't want any of the understructures, any of the engineering that goes into the outfit to create the proper shape to be visible on the outside. And all these layers of petticoats in this era are typically white. And the reason for that is hygienic reasons, because white petticoats can be boiled and made sure that they are truly clean. They are easier to clean than colored items where you would have to worry about the color fastness. It isn't until the cheap synthetic dyes come that colored underwear starts to be a thing. Here you might notice that though the skirts are full throughout this era, there is a significant difference in length. In the early 30s, the skirts are much shorter. They have the ankle typically visible, so they are what we would nowadays consider tea gown length, but that I like to call fairy princess length because that's really what the silhouette reminds me of. And then in the later 30s, the ankles start to be covered, the length lengthens, and it lengthens again up until the 40s, where it basically is ground level. Throughout this era, a one-piece dress is the standard for women rather than a separate bodice and a skirt portion. Most of these gowns close in the back, though there are some front closing gowns in this era too. But it isn't really an issue that if your gown closes in the back because nobody would really live alone. So you could always get a family member, a child, or a servant to help you close these gowns. For day dresses like this, cotton, silk, and wool were all used by all classes throughout the entire era. The real difference doesn't come from the fiber itself, but rather the quality of the fabric. The more you can afford to spend on your dress, the better quality the fibers and the fabrics are going to be. It is going to last a lot longer and look a lot nicer for a lot longer. And here you can see the biggest and most dramatic difference in the silhouette that goes on in this era, and that is the sleeve shape. To support those absolutely ginormous gigot sleeves of the early 30s, you would need sleeve supports, and they are tied onto the inside of the sleeve to stay in place. These dresses also have a very wide neckline, giving either the illusion of being off the shoulder or actually being off the shoulder, and the sleeve is dropped, which really helps emphasize that silly fairy princess look. In the later part of the 30s, that gigot sleeve is still there, but it gets ruched down and worked down so that the top part of that isn't full anymore or doesn't look full, and the fullness is only in the bottom half of the sleeve. And after the first few years of the 40s, all of the fullness from the sleeve has disappeared and sleeves are very tight fitting and sleek, though they could sometimes have a separate short sleeve on top. On its own, this black wool dress is a fine example of the average woman's best dress. But to add more interest to it, I'm adding a lace collar. This is very much inspired by 17th century lace. This sort of lace collars were very commonly sold to all different price points, and women would oftentimes attach them with just pins. This would give your gowns a lot of versatility, and you could dress up an old gown to make it look new fairly cheaply. While the bodices of the later 30s and 40s are most often pointed basque bodices, in the earlier 30s, they are actually not only cut straight, but oftentimes give the illusion of a raised waist. And that illusion is emphasized by wearing a fairly wide belt at your waist. This helps balance out those fairly silly proportions of this era. Shoes throughout this era are square-toed and flat. They were typically either slipper style, what we would now consider a ballerina, or then ankle boots. As for jewelry in the beginning of the era, extremely long-chained necklaces are extremely fashionable. This one is a magnifying glass. As the necklines rise higher, necklaces become more of an evening accessory, and brooches become your standard daytime jewelry, with large cameos being extremely fashionable. And as the sleeves deflate in this era, so does the hair. In the beginning of the 30s, hair is very high, very wild, and very out there. And then as the sleeves deflate, so does the hair, and it goes lower, and the surrounding bits around your face become more streamlined and drooping, forming a frame for your face. So all in all, the changes in the 30s are dramatic, whereas as you get into the 40s, they become much more gradual and slower. And since this gets asked every time I show the separate pockets, yes, they are accessible through the gowns and all the layers of petticoats. There's slits in all of the garments in the right place so that you can reach that pocket. And there is one layer of undergarments that I'm not actually wearing, but that was very common in this era, and that is a bustle pad. Because as you can see, even though the skirts are full, there is still a clear kickback in the back portion of the skirt. And because skirts of this era are oftentimes pleated or gathered fairly evenly throughout, that really comes from only your anatomy, or if you don't do that naturally, then you would add a pad. Because like always in historical fashion, the silhouette is the important thing. If you don't come with the curves naturally, then you buy them. And unlike if today, it was not considered a failure in your body's part. It was just considered a part of getting the proper silhouette. Which one of these silhouettes is your favorite? Well, that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, feel free to do that, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!